So I'm Cynthia Sharp, and I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's evening. We're grateful to the Coast Salish people for allowing us to be on their unceded territory tonight. We have, of course, our two amazing poets, but before I introduce our poets, I want to introduce our publisher, Richard Olafson. Maybe he can say a few words about his publishing company and these two great poets.
Yes, thank you. I'm very proud to have had a long relationship with Susan. I published two of her first books, Locutions and Light Housekeeping, plus a extensive anthology of spiritual poetry that I call The Matter of Spirit, and I'm very proud of those. I've dedicated my life to publishing poetry of all forms because to me poets are the soul catchers, and they catch the soul of the world in language, and Susan and Jude do that particularly effectively. They both poets delight the soul in very unexpected ways. They embody the material and the spiritual. Aquinas is ground of being combined with Jacob Beam's on ground of being. So you have the grounding and the on ground coming together, and I also publish a literary journal, the Pacific Rim Review of Books, and along with Ekstasis, and we're just about to release the latest issue. Actually, I'm hoping to. I should tell you, I haven't told you yet, Cynthia, but I'm hoping to republish your review of Impromptu in this issue. It's 56 tabloid pages, and I delayed it somewhat because I worked very extensively on a very detailed article on the Great Reset, and I'm publishing that, and so a lot of the issue is going to be devoted to the Great Reset. And this is probably the most important event to happen in 20,000 years to humanity. I think as spiritual poets, we really need to address this issue because it's a very serious transformation of the world. The oligarchs are, and this is all on the World Economic Forum website. It's called the Great Reset. So they have the documents out there, the planning documents out there, and it is an event that's going to turn all of humanity into commodities. It's going to be the complete commodification of human beings and every other living organic and inorganic element of the world. And this is coming very quickly. And I think as spiritual poets, we all have to address this issue, decide what it is, what is a human being, and whether humanity will continue in this form or some other form. Because and so I just exhort everyone to look at this next issue and take a look at it very carefully and consider all the links and follow them down the wherever the path will take you, because this is a major transformation that is taking place right now. And so I have to bring this into awareness, and it's my moral duty as a thinking human being. It's my moral duty to inform people of what is actually taking place. And so I thought this is a better place than ever, because Jude and Susan are both poets of spirit, and this is we can turn this into a draconian world of a nightmare world of complete control and commodification or the financialization of everything, or we can express the spirit and join with the rest of humanity to fight this nightmarish plan that they have ready to go in 2030. Okay, thanks very much. So I just wanted to say that. So I wanted to say thank you to Jude and Susan for your reading in advance, and I love both of your poems, and I've been in love with both your poems for many years. So thank you very much for your reading. So, and check out the website, EkstaSisEditions.com.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'll just let everyone know the structure of the evening is that I'll first introduce Susan, and she'll read from her new book, Heartwork, for about 20 minutes. Then I'll introduce Jude, and she'll read from her new book, The River Answers. Then we'll have a short Q&A for anyone to type their comments into the chat room. And I'll ask both poets questions. So we'll start with Susan and then move on to Jude. So now is the point where everyone except Susan should mute their mics. And I get to introduce this incredible poet. Susan McCaslin is a Canadian poet from Fort Langley, British Columbia, who has published 16 volumes of poetry, including her most recent, which we're here for tonight, Heartwork from Ekstasis Editions in 2020. She has recently collaborated with J.S. Porter on a volume of creative nonfiction, Super Abundantly Alive, Thomas Merton's Dance with the Feminine. That's from Woodlake in 2018. Her selected poems, Into the Open, was published by Anana in 2017. And in 2012, she initiated the Hanshan Poetry Project in a successful effort to help save a rainforest near her home along the Fraser River in Glen Valley. So please welcome Susan McCaslin.
Thank you, everyone. Your applause is silent, but I can see the hands. It's just a pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to begin by thanking Jude for inviting me into sharing this reading that she and Cynthia had organized as I'm the second reader, and it's very generous. And I want to also thank Richard for the many years of his friendship, and share with you that when he first accepted my very first published volume of, to be published manuscript, Locutions, I was over the moon, and Richard and I have enjoyed and Carol continuing friendship. So in many ways, coming back to do another Ekstasis book is a kind of coming full circle for me at this stage in my life, and I appreciate it very much. So I'm going to be reading from Heartwork, and I know you can't see the cover probably, but I'm going to hold it up anyway, just in case. There's an image on it that I'll explain later. That yeah, I'm sure you can't see it because I can't see it when I'm looking at it. But it's a collage by a Langley artist, friend of mine named Betty Spackman, who can't be here tonight, but it includes mandalas by Hildegard of Bingen, who her sisters at the monastery in Germany in the 12th century helped her create. That includes other images combined with some of Hildegard of Bingen's designs that are based on her visionary experiences. So this book, Heartwork, works with the metaphor of the heart, or not only the physical organ, but obviously as a poet, the various nuances about what heart work might mean. So I'm not going to try to discuss that, but some of the heart imagery comes up in what I'm reading tonight. But after putting the poems together and assembling the book, it had 4 sections. And then it occurred to me in retrospect that the heart has 4 chambers. And I thought that was kind of interesting. So I'm going to begin with the first section called Songs for Hildegard. And I'm just reading one poem from there because I've been reading others at other readings. And I wanted to spend more time tonight on other parts of the book that haven't had much exposure. But this one is just about Hildegard. She was, as I said, a mystic, a visionary, a Dominican nun who lived in the Bingen area of northern Germany. But she was also a composer. She wrote the first mystery morality play, the music. She also was a writer and a herbalist, a kind of natural scientist for her day. And she also spoke truth to power. She communicated with the Pope and the Emperor and made her voice known. So she is a very remarkable kind of Renaissance woman of her era. If I discovered her through Matthew Fox's work decades ago, but I've had a long-term interest in the mystics, beginning with my first love of William Blake. So a number of the poems tonight have to do with the mystical traditions. So this one is called Hildegard Meets St. Francis and the Wolf, which is kind of impossible in time because, in Betty's collage, she brings together the image of St. Francis and Hildegard, a meditation on Betty Spackman's panel 9 of A Creature Chronicle. The cosmos lives in layers as a collage vibrates in layered images. Old and new, past and present converge. Chronos and Kairos kiss. Linear time and timelessness find places to embrace. Lines and circles play hide and seek beneath a rooster's weather vane, where St. Francis bows. Suddenly we are here now, with haloed brother hair, Francis and his pal Bro Wolf, who, it is said, Frank tamed, or rather, gentled by kindness, food, respect. No wonder the saints' hands wear halos, extending peace to all. Under Wolf's belly squats a pert, everyday dog, golden nimbused, perhaps like the mutt a Palestinian woman once riffed on with Jesus, cheekily insisting, even dogs get a few scraps, so why not me? Jesus turns, listens, barrier breaker. So many circles, Hildegard, like your own rotating mandalas, one of which soars above Francis's head, along with the wild geese who know the way home. And that's the only one I'm reading from section 1. So section 2 is called Negative Capability Suite. And these are 25 poems plus a coda based on excerpts from the letters of the Romantic poet John Keats. And this is the bicentenary of his death. He died February 23rd, 1821. So I'm reading 3 poems from this section because I haven't had the opportunity to read from it as much in the few Zoom readings I've done since the book came out. And I'm going to begin there's 25 poems, one for each year of his short life and a coda. So I'm going to read one that sort of deals with his concept of negative capability, since that's the title of the grouping. Each poem begins with a snippet from his letters. And I have to say that for me, his letters are full of embedded poems, little jewels of poems. In fact, the letters are remarkable. I would say that the letters themselves are poems. And I've been a fan of his ever since I encountered him in high school. So the epigraph is the snippet. Negative capability, that is when we are capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. Incapably capable here in mist, doubting all, but being in the world without any petty, fractious reaching, grabbing after fact, the verifiable. No folding into factoids till we become the all and nothing of stardust, yearning backwards into presence. So the next one, I've got my little tags here. The epigraph. Call the world, if you please, the vale of soul making, VALE, like a valley. No systematic theologian, yet you parsed the mysteries with questions like Job wailed from the dung heap. Why pain, sorrow, loss? You didn't seek a salvation scheme of punishment, redemption by a God outside the world, but told a story of how we forge our souls, distinct identities, like the mystics. You spoke of us as sparks, beads of quickening life, of how we are divine. For the sparks are pure, bliss bathed, yet we must go to school to make them shine. In your story, intelligence, heart, and worlds of elemental space burnish each other. Active process moves through weal and woe till the busy mind lowers into the heart, flourishing where the heart is always core. And this is the last Keats poem that deals with his last months of his life. As you probably know, he died of tuberculosis in Italy. I am picked up and sorted like a pip. My imagination is a monastery, and I am its monk. To Percy Bysshe Shelley, who also died, as you know, of a drowning accident. The Romantics had a very exciting and strange lives. In the monastery of your final months in Rome, you become monk-like, monos, eremitic, alone, one, a mourner far from England's green, near the Spanish steps. Yet you had often before felt the crush when the identity of everyone in a room pressed upon you, till you had no sense of self, falling as if into some other body, selfless, bare, like a Sufi saint, which is to say, annihilated, unpoetical. Though in that state, sun, moon, and stars became your voice, words surpassing words, mediums for thinking, feeling, dust, pen and books, the gathering bards covering your head to make you live again, or like Shakespeare's fool in Lear, a sorted pip, dark apple seed, all too briefly here. I'm so astounded at the youth of him and what he accomplished. So I am now moving on to section 3, which I haven't read from before because it's a collaborative sequence called Caribou Fires 2017, consisting of poems by me, haiku-like short poems, and colored photographs of the caribou fires of that year that were so devastating, among the worst fires we've ever had in Canada. And my husband and I have his family has a cabin east of 70 Mile House in the Caribou. And luckily the cabin was spared because of the valiant firefighters, but we lost the dock, the boathouse, all the trees, and many people. We came there afterwards and surveyed the damage, and that was the time when we took the pictures. So I am going to hold up the photos. You probably won't be able to see them well, but if you buy the book, you'll get to see that Richard would generously included color photos, which are quite expensive, more expensive than black and white. And so I was so thrilled with that because I thought they're more powerful in color. So this is the first one. It's just a devastated landscape. And it's the first poem. Before Heraclitus sang, the world is fire. Fire honed the words we breathe. Flame, again we meet you. But what a sharpening edge. And Heraclitus, as you may know, is one of the pre-Socratic philosophers that claimed the base element of creation was fire. And I'm reading 3, but they're all fairly short. This one is a picture of some moose tracks in ash, so it probably doesn't come off very clearly, but I'll read the poem. City slickers in camo gear, rifles slung across backs, stride dirt roads, scanning for moose. No camouflage for critters. Hunters scrutinize moose tracks in needle-strewn ash. Back tomorrow. And there were also cows just, lost in the forest, nothing to eat. It was pretty, it is regenerating. There is always that aspect of nature. But we were both mourning and looking at a sort of eerie beauty of the burn. So this will be the last one I'll read. You can't tell again what it is. It's a bunch of ash collected with refuse that burned from some of the boathouse. And it looks almost like an abstract painting. As when Dante heard the whoosh of dark wind, new fire inverted, cut from imagination's flames, so here, a severed music, ice below, wincing flames above, a disunity of elements. So the last section is called Corona, Corona, and the title poem of the sequence is a corona of sonnets, which is a crown of sonnets that were called coronas. Some of you, if you've done form poetry, might have learned about this, that the last line of the first sonnet becomes the first line of the next sonnet, and so on. And then the last line of all the sonnets goes back to the first line of the first sonnets. Are you confused? And I'm not going to read that one tonight because I've read it and it's quite long. And so I wanted to read some other pieces, but I just thought I'd let you know that it's there. It was written in the early stages of the pandemic. What I am going to read is a poem called Persephone's Nook. And again, one of my books is called Demeter Goes Skydiving, but when I was in university, I discovered the Demeter Persephone myths, and I've been fascinated with both figures. And as a young woman, I identified more with Persephone, and then now with the mother Demeter. But they both dwell inside me, and mythologically is transcendent. But this one is kind of a blending with Persephone and the mother. Persephone's Nook. Spring. Persephone is scrunched up in her underground book nook, reading, writing. The nib of her pen scratches away. Fingers that pecked at the old Smith Corona play the new Mac. So many mismatched technologies layered in body and brain, still flowing through her fingers. Green ink, green font, entire alphabet singing, please release us. Words on air, underground tunnels, subterranean streams, trickle, tickle up her spine. It's not Mother's Day, though she, mother's sound, would love, be loved as crone, revitalized, kick up her heels in a field, once again gathering narcissus and rue. She rues nothing. Something ventures, falls back into quarantine, sequestered, awaiting the prodigious human turnaround that may or may not come. I think that's what Richard's talking about, the turnaround that may or may not come. But we have to do what we can. I have two more poems, and this one is based on another mystic, one of my favorite mystics, Julian of Norwich from 14th century England. She lived through the bubonic plague, and some biographical details come through in the poem, and the epigraph explains where this poem comes from. So the epigraph, the title is Small is Large, and the epigraph are the words of Julian of Norwich from her records of her visions, Revelations of Divine Love, one of the earliest books in Europe, and certainly from a mystic that's survived. And in this, he showed me a little thing, the quantity of a hazelnut lying in the palm of my hand, as it seemed, and it was as round as any ball. I looked upon it with the eye of my understanding and thought, what may this be? And it was answered generally thus, it is all that is made. Julian of Norwich. Black Plague, 14th century. Recluse Julian is self-anchored in her anchorage off the side of the church. Cupped in her palm, a single hazelnut. Round world, all and nothing world, nothing and all venture. Vanishingly small. Beginning and ending, continuous in all things, made, loved, kept. Evolving in dark ground. Sleeping beyond sight, sound, dreaming in yellow-brown coat, its life out of death nutrients, generosity. Pilgrims will walk or ride to the grate of Julian's window, seeking soul guidance, which the little affable saint gladly provides out of her ample stores. Harvest of hazelnuts. More seekers sprouting, maturing, self-generating, out of their hidden depths, new seeds. And I'm going to close now with the last poem in the book and in this section called Bee and Peony. Unpacking, let me start again. Unpanicking with Pan, beatific beings become one pink flush. One opens, one sips and sups. So they, ecstatic, co-inhabit paradise. And we, though purblind, may quaff those perfumed depths through one sweet intake of breath. Thank you very much. Lovely to see you all. And I'm going to put my sound back on, maybe? No?
Yeah, thank you so much, Susan. That was exquisite. And be sure to check the chat room because there are lots of beautiful comments.
I can't chat and read at the same time, unfortunately.
So I'm gonna send the poets the chat after the session as well. But just thank you so much. That was exquisite.
Cynthia. And everyone.
Now my pleasure to introduce Jude Neale, who's going to read for about 20 minutes as well. And then we'll be able to ask our questions for the poets at the end. Jude Neale is a Canadian classically trained opera singer, educator, mentor, and prolific poet who's been widely published both nationally and internationally. She's collaborated with dancers, musicians, artists, and other poets, which she wrote about for the League of Canadian Poets in her article, Sum of All Parts, a chapbook on multimedia. Jude has been a finalist for the Pat Lowther Award from the League of Canadian Poets, and her poem Blue Bowl was shortlisted in the prestigious Gregory O'Donoghue Poetry Prize out of Ireland. So please welcome Jude Neale to launch her newest collection, The River Answers.
Hello. Hello, everyone who came tonight. How exciting. I'm so happy to see you. Susan, that was wonderful. I loved it. It's going to take something to follow you. I'm afraid I'm not so intellectual as you, so you'll hear a difference. I'm going to start with something funny. And it's about everyone's had this experience, I'm sure, but this is my first date. His name was Gary. He told me he loved me. I was 15. I didn't care about his brimming heart. I had set my sights on bigger fish. So he said, just this once, come out with me. His eyebrows were dark and bushy and spread horizontally across the width of his brow. I knew I was his last hope. I agreed because I grieved my reaction to this imperfection. I was secretly overjoyed to be going out on a date to midget wrestling in the Nanaimo arena. So unlike all the other Saturday nights when I had played gin rummy with my dad, staring at the black telephone, hoping for a miracle. A taxi pulled up to our house. My dad nodded his approval. Then the knock at the door signaled to my entire family to assemble en masse. With their unashamed scrutiny, I swung the door open to reveal poor Gary, clutching the dripping stem of a single red rose. My mom hugged him. I took his hand, unsure if I held the weight of fear or paradise. The next one is about my dad and I and my brothers when I was about 7 or 6, around there, and he had been a war vet and done Russia on a destroyer, so he used to tell us stories, and this is about that. Small gifts. The ceiling I stared at was the cream of tulips. I lay in my bunk listening to the true stories that came from my young father's lips. He spoke of Russia and bread lines, and I squeezed my eyes shut just to see them too. The filigreed oak chair sat in the corner below the blackboard, where we had each printed our names and claimed this room for our very own. He brushed the yellow linoleum with the sole of his shoes, and they slid and squeaked against the newly polished floor. On the wallpaper floated green teapots and pink roses. I peeled some off in a secret space beside my bed, hoping to see what lay underneath. In the corner, by the window, was my baby brother's crib. He slept in the beam of moonlight and was outlined in a wash of silver. My father filled the small bedroom with his story and careless jokes. Everything was familiar, from the thin black crack on the ceiling to the brown braided carpet where my pink fuzzy slippers waited for morning. This Nanaimo home held my family that swelled and was love happy. I lay sleepily, letting my father's words fill my head with awe. Darkness spread over the bed and slipped under the door. The clock chimed in the kitchen. Then my father kissed our brows and slipped quietly out of the hushed and somnolent room. Thank you. This next poem is what the book was titled for, and I really like, probably my favorite poem in the book, because of the last line. I fell in love with my own last line. The river answers. I would pin your memory to the river, Nana, if you would stay. You flash your quick smile at the camera, but what did you see beyond the lens? Were the mountains spruce blue and the water roiling at the confluence? Did you stop to see the dragonfly hover over the rock, then lift off, a blur of cobalt and green? Did your tongue gladden at the small wild berries that filled the bushes with a glazed purple hue? Did you gasp at the sound of your own velvet voice, returning back and back again from canyons above? Did you smell the coming of the quenching rain, which soothed the sweltering heat of a July afternoon in the Rockies? You were sap happy in summer, grateful for the abundant possibilities laid before you at your table of plenty. The river remembers, me standing behind you, following your life like a map. Thank you. Thank you. The next poem started out as a prompt, and you had to write 40 lines about an image. And then you had to take those 40 lines and make it 10. And then you had to take the 10 lines and make it 5. And then you had to take those 5 lines and make it 1. So this came from a 40-line poem. It is now 1 line, and it is called The Discovery. She bent down to pick the flower and clenched it between her palms, dirty and soft, still damp from her mouth. This poem, I'd like to give a call out to Sita, who liked this poem a lot, so I'm going to read it for her. The bird. I've been wondering what causes a hummingbird to hover just on the edge of the blaze of geraniums, so sure of flight. Do they flirt with the air so they can become a weightless antidote to fear? I have seen the flash of their wings when they suddenly reverse into the crimson petunias. They hang, suspended, drinking deeply from the nectar. What does red taste like? Does it cause their little hearts to break into 1,000 glittering shards? I've watched them sleep within the japonica bush. What do they dream? Is it a shafts of light on their breast and the riffle of a breeze, or the moment reflecting back the secret of flight? Oh, bird, you do nothing but trail beauty behind you like a prayer flag. The knowing. Today you cupped my head in your palm, and I leaned into you and surrendered. You offer your shade when I'm thirsty, or sustenance when I'm hollowed out and empty as a drum. I have so much more to give you in these harvest years. Like a broad-leaved plant, I wait for your light to entwine with mine. I am gifted by the knowing of you. Deliverance. Does the wind see the clouds skittering down low across a darkening evening sky? Distance and proximity are relative. It doesn't matter a damn to the broken who decides life isn't a peach. difficult to pluck and impossible to deliver. Doom is always etched in the bottom of their shoes, dallying at the edges. They find a scrim drawn across divergent realities and hope for a time when they will dance a partner dance, aware only of redemption and glory. And the secret to this poem was I gave myself the challenge of starting every line with a D. John Prine died April 6th last year, and I was a great fan of his. I loved his lyrics. They were so wonderful. So I wrote a tribute poem to him, and it's called Something to Say. So here's to John. When I heard John Prine sing Souvenirs in my kitchen that day, I cried on the chair, gulping great tears, for he'd seen deep inside me, though I had nothing to say. He could stroke the wrist of the common man, then turn his gaze to the heart, find the girl in the crowded diner eating alone, just after she'd fallen apart. He could prod you to feel her husband's blank stare. He just wasn't seeing anyone there. He'd given up and left her alone, not stroking her beautiful hair. He tells stories in that way that was his alone, things that weren't found in the news. He captured the sweetness of long summer days in the tune of his steel string blues. He could make you look deeply into the eyes of the broken who wait to be found in the night. There was no one to see and no one to care until John came and switched on the light. So let's raise a glass to the wretched and one to the life we must lead, for you plucked the heartstrings of many who sang along with your song to be free. Another snippet of my life exposed like an onion. This is called Teddy Bear's Picnic. My bear was named Max for short. He saw a lot. He saw my twin brothers spit in my face because that was his sibilant language. And he didn't flinch when the lights went out like me. My bear didn't care if I failed, cheated, or lied. He knew why. He saw how scared I was when I tucked into his neck. My bear talked. He told me I was brave. He told me love was simple, that it always comes down to yes or no. He showed me how to become invisible and leave no mark. His amber eyes followed the shadows and bore witness to the chaotic course I was on. When I wasn't sure what childhood was, my bear Max held up the mirror. The beautiful truth of you. So much pain in me some days that I leak like a rain barrel into ground that is cracked and worn by the fist of loss. How can I soothe the sore heart that relentlessly beats, even when I turn my face to the wall, mind caked with grief? Where are you now, my darling boy? Do you keep the words close that I sprayed through the phone, arrows aimed at the timeless weight of loving? The sky never blinks. She just witnesses the fine threads leading me to the beautiful truth of you. This poem I wrote for my son. The bowl. The salad bowl he made me needed a silken touch. I liked to stroke its curves and hollows where his hands had patiently sanded the golden wood, smooth as satin. He coaxed out the swirls and tracings of growth and rebirth. His offerings holds the secrets of oranges, cradling their scent and form. I oiled it carefully, moving the cloth around and round the polished grain. He gave it to me as a gift one Christmas, and I couldn't hold back the tears. He said, "My love is a circle never ending. You are the nest I return to when I'm leaning into the dark." His hands carved from a block of teak the form of a bowl, and from that he filled the brimming vessel. That was me. Where we stood. They gathered and sang one song, then left it in the corners and beside the chairs, on the tables and under eider downs, on the window ledges and in each other. How could they have known the secrets that live in that space behind the knees? That arms as they rise make bones fly, and scars are made of someone else's stories and are seldom the ones you see. That you can kiss the cleft of a baby just to be the first, and oh, the skin they touched. Bathed skin, brown skin, bruised skin, palms and fingers and painted toes. They heard the questions and asked their own, listened to the whispered fears of a rude boy with stones for lungs. A girl in yellow boots clutched the hand of a 7-year-old boy, learning the music of thin reeds and his own simple future. They tasted the exotic in Zanzibar, traveled home to Ithaca to find out where they were, walked with hooded priests through forests, lighting the sky on fire, over ice floes, over oceans, over high deserts and fragrant prairies, to back alleys, to sacred places, to their forgotten lives, and to the ones they held on to. There were 7-part poems, 12-line poems, ones that had never reached so far. Story poems, first poems, stuck poems, and some that teased them and stole their sleep. They looked closely from great distances at cowboys and those who sleep in dumpsters, piano players with upside down music, and a woman with arms strong enough to stir the pot that held them all. They chased black dogs and blonde ones, followed grasshoppers, whales, hummingbirds, stood in quiet communion with that 4-point buck, Grace, on a Sunday morning. They left meaning behind and searched only for the sound, sang their words, found their rhythm, opened to the spirit that lives in all poems. A scarlet butterfly rose and lulled them to their rest with the notes of the one great song. Then they all abandoned themselves to that final sweet surprise. My last poem is for my grandchildren. It's called Dancing Free. If I lost my voice, I would learn to speak with my hands. I would stroke you when you cried and hold you tightly in my embrace when you were afraid. I would draw the letters of the alphabet on your palm so I could print your name as clearly as it is written across my open heart. little ones. I would pass on the color and light in my words and the joy of a summer day in my smile washing over you. My longing to go higher and deeper within each moment I would give to you to keep. For the days you are cloistered and feeling small, I want you to know the beauty of your life unfolding before you is a gift I celebrate. For you are dancing forward, unencumbered and free. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jude. That was beautiful. As Bonnie Kwan Simon said in the chat, you read with such incredible emotion. Your voice is gorgeous. It gives such beautiful light to your work.
Thank you.
It was such an honor to have both you and Susan here tonight. So we're going to go back, think of Susan's reading. And Susan, we're so grateful that you joined us. So we need Susan to turn on her video and microphone. And people can start posting questions or comments for Susan that you want me to ask her in the chat room. And to get started, I want to go first. I'm so inspired by your poetry, Susan, everything you do and all the threads that you weave into it. And you have a profound belief that words can change things, which I just love. And I wonder if you could elaborate on that, about the power of words.
That's a good question, Cynthia. Can everyone hear me? Am I on? Am I
Yeah.
muted? Okay, great. I think that words can touch a deeper part of us. That's a more. Am I coming through?
Yeah, you are. You are.
Integrated, unified consciousness that dwells deep within inside of us. Thomas Merton called it the hidden wholeness that's in everyone. And I think words, though they're trying to name things, they also can address the nameless and the things we can't express through words. So there's kind of a dialogue between words and direct experience that you get in the mystics, where there's an apophatic tradition, they call it, where they're trying to hold on to what words can do and what words can't do, but words can suggest something larger and point to connect the reader or the person who experiences it and the poet to that non-dual state, I would call it, where it's not a thing between words and wordlessness, but it's like on a canvas of a painting, you have your paints and your structures, but you also maybe have the blank spaces, the emptiness. And in mystical poetry, there is that dialectic between the two. So sometimes you feel like the poems are writing you a little bit more than you're just transcribing an idea and transmitting an intellectual concept. So Jude said I was an intellectual poet, but I also realized the limits of the intellect by itself. And, I think emotions, the body, all those things are part of what poetry can bring you to that place where the reader participates and experiences that in their own way based on what the poem can offer.
Such profound insight. Fiona Tinmai Lam wants to know how you wrote your sonnet Corona.
Oh, how I wrote it. That's a good question, Fiona. I guess I looked at the form and saw other people doing it and read their poems. And I studied it. John Donne has Corona, and other poets I studied in graduate school. So I've been aware of the form. And I decided to use, instead of using rhyme metered sonnets, I decided to free myself a bit by using free verse sonnets. So I have the 14 lines and cadence and assonance, alliteration, all those other devices, but not the end rhyme. So that kind of freed me up. And then I think I came up with some of the first lines and the last lines, but sometimes the last line would come at the end of the first poem, and then I'd find out some other way to transition from there into the next poem. As you know, as writers, we don't preconceive things. Sometimes things sort of occur to us in the process itself, and discovery is happening. So it's not pre-planned. And in some cases, I didn't have the last line of one sonnet be exactly the same as the next line of the next sonnet. I took some liberties with using the same words, but maybe in slightly different syntax, or with a slightly different nuance by a change of a couple of words. But basically, I did keep the same structure. It wasn't as hard as doing rhymed metered poetry because of the free verse. But I have in my life done a lot of both free verse and metrical form poetry. And I found sometimes the form poetry starts out as an exercise, but once it grabs you, you get into it, the constraint kind of creates a new kind of freedom that you have to work within that to come up with something new.
There's a question from Jennifer. How many sonnets in a corona of sonnets, and can it vary?
Yes, it can vary. Some of them are longer and some shorter. There may have been some rules at one point, but I've read quite a few that are different. I can't remember how long John Donne's were, but I decided when I done my 3, I was sort of done with that poem, and it worked. And it's still 14 line times 3. How many is that? It's a little longer, so it has a momentum. And I think that now a poet is free to make it as long or as short as one likes. So
One last question for you, unless I missed anyone, in which case we should put it in again to help me out. Your work has this incredible compassion and awareness for protecting the environment, for social justice issues. And I wonder what that process has been like. Did the poetry come first? Did the environmental awareness come first? Are they two threads that come together?
Well, as a child, I always loved nature. One of my first poems was written about sitting in an apple tree singing. I wanted to be an opera singer like Jude, but I didn't make it. So there is that. But because I was a reader and really reading before I went to school and so on, and I went into literature, and I'm in my head a lot too. And I found when I met my husband, Mark, I was too much in my head. Mark would say, look at the tree, here's an idea, but stick your head in the bush, smell the fragrance. And he really helped me to develop that more. We go out into wilderness areas on hikes, and he would always draw my attention to the birds, and he knew their names and the names of the plants. He is an environmental lawyer. He went into environmental law because of his love of nature as a boy. So I think he contributed greatly to me getting more into nature in my poetry. And then the social aspect, social political, is that though I wasn't much of an activist most of my life, I would write letters to the newspaper occasionally and that sort of thing. But Mark was an activist. He led a campaign to save what became Pinecone Burke Provincial Park. He worked on the first successful land claims case in BC in the Chilcotin. His whole life is devoted to saving old growth. He just weeps at what's happened to old growth. So when this Han Shan thing that I came up with the idea for that, but I won't go into too much detail, but he's the one that drew me into that neighborhood campaign to save a rainforest. And it turned out that my idea was to bring poetry into it, to have events with poetry in the forest to get publicity. And he and I got so involved in that. It was like one idea after another would come. Like we'd done one event in the forest and it was like on to the next. And I finally experienced what it was like to be an activist. It was like the forest was calling us and we just couldn't quit. And we had so much energy and we would sit there and grieve and think, gee, we may have to watch this place get chainsawed. But it's not about attachment to ends. It's about doing the right thing, doing the best we can and not thinking about ends, non-attachment. But somehow that we were really lucky and everything came together and that area was saved. So that was a heady experience for me. And yeah, so does that answer your question a little bit?
Totally does. And we're actually going to ask you one more if we switch over to Janet has a question for both you and Jude. So that'll be our transition over to some questions for Jude. Janet Quammen says, I love your haiku, and she says, both Susan and Jude, do you prefer writing short poems or long ones? So I'll ask Susan one more time. Do you prefer short or long?
Let Jude begin.
No, you go ahead, Susan.
I have a whole bunch of questions for Jude too. I never want to let anybody go.
Well, I would say that I've done both at different times in my life. Like my Teresa poems were just little couplets, and the Blake poem, Letters to William Blake, were letters. So. But I've done, these actually, the ones in this book are not officially haikus, like they're not five syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. They're just shorter 2 to 3 line poems. So they bear some semblance to some of the Japanese forms, but I wouldn't call them haiku. But right now I'm working on a sequence called Cracking the Jesus Koans, Koans, and I'm writing koan like little paradoxical poems that are really short, and they also deal with the Gnostic Gospels and other Jesus traditions that aren't in the canonical Gospels and so on. And I'm having fun with that because you have to be brief. If you're trying to crack a koan, you sound pretty arrogant, but you also need to be paradoxical and brief yourself so that the reader can participate and work in it. It's not, it's not going to be if it's too long, it doesn't fit the context of a koan, like it's because it's about a sudden illumination that comes from something small, and you see it shifts you to a different level of consciousness. And I find the short form sometimes can do that, or short stanzas within longer poems. So I do like both and kind of go back and forth.
And Susan, thank you so much for joining this launch. It was so wonderful to have you be part of this. It was so enriching to get to host 2 poets and two books. So thank you so much. And now we're going to shift over and ask Jude some questions. Why don't we start with Janet's question for Jude? So we need Jude. I think she's got her camera on. What do you prefer, short or long?
I started out in my poetry career, as you can call it loosely, writing poems that were no longer than 11 lines long. In fact, my first book is a book that is full of poems that are 11, 12, 13 lines long. And then I discovered the beauty of narrative, where I could hang my metaphor and my similes. And I like writing narrative, so I stick to about 40 to 60 lines in a poem, or as you heard today, there are some shorter, but they feel longer. But I do prefer longer poems for me.
And Jude, there's a question from Jackie Ann Mins. Can you speak a little on your writing process? Beyond using props and exercises, how do your poems formulate?
I use writing prompts a lot, Jackie. I go to around the world and try and find prompts that interest me, and then I write about them. And what was the rest of the question, Cynthia?
How do your poems formulate?
I usually start with a line, like in there's a poem I wrote called "A Quiet Coming of Light," and that poem has the line "Cuttlebone knives," which I'm sure only I knew of because it was my great grandmother's carving knife set, and that's what triggered me for that. And I wrote a whole poem around that with that in the center of the poem, and everything's springing out from that. So it's usually one line, and I will go from there.
And Sita has a question, but I'm having trouble reading it. Maybe Sita, you can turn on your microphone and just ask Jude directly.
Yes, I've noticed, I guess this is with Susan, but is just open for whomever. There was a lot of explanation with regards to the poems, and I guess in my generation, in learning to read poetry, it's about, saying your name, the title, taking a deep breath, and reading it, and kind of letting it up to the I guess your audience's interpretation. So what do you take from that? Do you think that's really useful to have like an audience's interpretation?
I think it's extremely useful to set up context for a poem. I read many poems without any introduction because they didn't need it, but some needed context in order to understand it fully and enjoy it fully.
Yeah, I would say that my poems, because they use mythology and mystics and things like that, if someone didn't know much about that, just a little bit of context would give them an entrance into the poem. Not all my poems are like that. Like I think Bee and Peony, and anyone who's experienced a bee and a flower could get that one. So I didn't do a lead up for that. But I want to say that I think it's good that there's a variety of poetry styles out there, everything from rap and, spoken word to more literary poetry. And that I don't think one's better than the other. They all have their place. And I really admire different styles than my own, so I don't think everyone has to write in the same way. But I do, before a reading, I sort of think I don't want to be tempted to talk too much so that my commentary overwhelms the poem. The poem should be foregrounded. So sometimes I have to remind myself, cut it short, Susan, you're talking too much. Shut up and just read the poem. So I get what you're saying. It's a balancing act.
So I think that's all the questions. I just want to go over to Jude really quickly and ask if I felt like, Jude, I felt like your book is a collection of snapshots that flow seamlessly together. And I wonder if you can give us a few final thoughts on how this beautiful new book, The River Answers, came together.
That's exactly how I describe it, Cynthia.
I stole your word.
My mind works like I'm taking pictures of everything in my mind. I'm taking pictures. I'm very visual. Every word has a picture behind it. And I totally would always use that in my writing.
So I think we'll close the evening there. A huge thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. We had 50 cameras, 50 people in the room tonight. Thank you for your time, your care, your comments in the chat room. Thank you to our two beautiful poets tonight for enriching our evening. To Richard, the publisher, for being here with us. A huge thank you to everyone for tonight.
Thank you to the poets.